The Biden administration approved an emergency sale of more than $100 million worth of tank ammunition to Israel, bypassing Congress. Joining us now to talk more about this, retired U.S. Navy Captain Pilot Armen Kurdian. Captain Kurdian, thank you. Let's begin there with $100 million worth of tank ammunition to Israel. How do you see this being helpful on the battlefield?
Good morning, Marni. Well, war material is always very important when you're fighting a battle. There's three major tenets to fighting this kind of a conflict: time, space, and material. And with that, you have speed. So with the weapons that we're providing to Israel and also Germany, perhaps the next largest supplier of weapons to Israel, Israel has what it needs to continue to prosecute this war on the ground. Their main enemy really is time and global opinion, sadly. They have two things they're fighting against time, and number one is hostages. Out of the original 240 hostages, about 120 or so have been released, or maybe 110, but also 30 have died in captivity. Some have been recovered, and along the same lines, the rising number of civilians being killed in Gaza. So Israel may have to choose to start speeding things up a little bit at the expense of perhaps some more casualties on their own side in order to bring this war to a quick conclusion, defeat Hamas, and then we can move on to the next chapter of peace in the Middle East.
We mentioned a moment ago non-binding, but the UN General Assembly is scheduled to hold this emergency meeting to vote on a draft resolution. They would like to see a ceasefire. Are you optimistic that that happens militarily? What are the risks and benefits?
Well, obviously, the big risk of a ceasefire is Hamas gets a chance to regroup. They did a lot of that. They moved some of their forces to the south. They reinforced some positions during the ceasefire when the hostage and prisoner exchange was done. That was part of Hamas's calculus. Now they are threatening to go ahead and kill hostages if Israel does not prosecute this war. So this also adds a little bit of urgency to Israel's timeline. Israel simply can't capitulate to this, as horrible and as terrible and as painful a decision that might actually be. If they do capitulate, they're just opening themselves up to this kind of situation happening again in the future. They've got to go in, they've got to get those hostages freed. And the United States needs to do a much better job of getting more global opinion and more of these countries on the side of Israel to end Hamas. And I don't think they've done a very good job of it so far.
One thing that we are seeing, the IDF says some of the terrorists are surrendering. There have been this mass surrender in a couple of places. What do you make of that at this point?
Well, that's very encouraging. The video of the surrendered soldiers, despite the fact they were in their underwear, although you'd have to check for those bombs, seeing those mass numbers surrender can be very discouraging if those images get back to the other Hamas terrorist fighters. But the message needs to be very clear to the fighters that if you surrender, turn over the hostages, turn over weapons, you're going to live. Otherwise, you're going to die. By Israeli standards or estimates, about 7,000 Hamas terrorists have been killed, as opposed to slightly more than 100 IDF soldiers. So you can see it's about a 70-to-1 advantage in terms of death. But of course, along those lines, again, you have those civilian casualties. But if they can continue to find these mass surrenders and get them to quit fighting, everybody wins in the end.
What do you know about the landscape of the battlefield, particular to Khan Yunis, the city in South Gaza, compared to what we saw in Gaza City weeks ago?
Well, it's a slightly smaller version of a very heavily and densely populated urban area with a lot of buildings, an enormous number of places to hide. Imagine having to go through an apartment building, apartment by apartment, room by room, to ensure that weapons have been cleared and terrorists have been cleared, and that also along those same lines that there's no tunnel entrances that are being hidden where these fighters can pop out and get behind you. So it is very time consuming. Israel's got to go a little bit faster, but it is a very dangerous environment. Civilians are still in the crossfire. Sometimes they're not allowed to leave. They're being encouraged to leave. They don't. And as we've seen, Hamas has been using schools and hospitals and other civilian locations to hide weapons and hide bombs. And it's a very terrible situation, but Hopefully, Israel can be methodical enough to clear Khan Yunis of these terrorists. They've killed about half of Hamas commanders as well. That can't be very encouraging for Hamas terrorists. So there's still a lot of work to be done.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.